Hey folks, thanks so much for joining us again. We have another exciting interview of experiences living abroad, and I am here with the beautiful Dale. Hi Dale, how are you?
I am well, Cinnamon. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to speak with you.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure you're going to give some great information to our viewers and listeners, so really excited about that. So Dale, tell us, where are you from?
Good question. Um, Initially, Barbados, the
Okay.
Caribbean. I'm a Canadian citizen, and I grew up in England as well. And I work internationally, so it's always one takes a pause before answering that question because basically I've been
Absolutely.
everywhere. Right? Yes.
And where are you currently? Where do you currently live?
I'm right this moment. I'm in Alberta, Canada,
Hmm.
but I have a 2-year contract in Bangladesh.
Hmm.
So I have a residence in Dhaka, Bangladesh. I came back from Bangladesh in March of 2000 of this year, 2020, due to COVID.
Right, right.
Okay. And so I'm working remotely from home.
Hmm.
And so people in Bangladesh are 12 hours ahead. And
Hmm.
so it's always very tricky. And I started my first meeting this morning at 5 a.m.
Mm. Okay.
Yeah, because it was 5 p.m. there.
Okay.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so
So
you're from Barbados. Where did you go? Were you raised in Barbados?
not really. Well, for the first 2 years of my life, I was raised there. And then I went to England, to Chartham near Canterbury, Kent in the UK. And beautiful part of the world. I was just watching Escape to the Country. And
Hmm.
one of the houses they profiled was in Chartham, my village where I used to live. And
Hmm.
it's absolutely gorgeous. It's a Garden of England,
Hmm.
right? A lot of
Hmm.
hops, a lot of agriculture. And at the time, I didn't realize it's surrounded on 3 sides, almost an isthmus, by water. But our parents never really took us to the water very much. That's interesting. So I
Hmm.
really want to go back there
Hmm.
after seeing the show and explore more of Kent and explore more of England. I adore England.
Hmm.
And then we immigrated to Canada when I was young, when I was about 10 years old,
Hmm.
to the prairies of Alberta. And
Hmm.
that's where I currently am today, on the
Hmm.
prairie in Edmonton, Alberta.
Awesome. So, if you don't mind me asking, what profession do you do that requires you to kind of travel to various countries and then get residency in India? I can't wait to hear about that experience.
Okay. Yes. So I'm an international educator.
Hmm.
I was a teacher for many years.
Hmm.
Prior to that, I was a social worker. And then about 15 years ago, I started working in education administration. So I'm currently the head of a school in Bangladesh. And,
Wow.
Cinnamon, I didn't really think this through. Had I known this would be recorded and everything, I would have dressed up a little more.
Oh,
But
come
anyway,
on. You look gorgeous. Stop it.
yeah, I'm in my running clothes. I'm about to go running after this
No, no,
interview.
no, you're fine. So, how did you make the jump from being an administrator were you an administrator in Canada and then you took a job in Bangladesh?
No. I've been working internationally for 25 years,
Hmm.
and so initially I was a teacher in Canada,
Hmm.
newly qualified teacher, and soon after graduating, I went overseas, and it was during the course of my positions overseas, I increasingly was given more positions of responsibility to the point where I am now heading a school. So I started off in Thailand, actually, way back when in 1995. Don't know if
Hmm.
you were born yet, but
Yes, I'm 40 plus years old.
yeah. So I was in Thailand for a while, and then I went to Japan. And I was teaching at a language school in Japan.
Hmm.
And then my contract was only for 3 months because I didn't know if I would like Japan. I did not like Thailand. And I believe
Hmm.
internationally, there's countries that work better for you than others. And I
Hmm.
think it fundamentally boils down to your values.
Hmm.
And I don't know if many people realize that, but there are cultures that have significant values that align with yours or not to varying degrees.
Right.
There's a lot of tests done on cultural discrepancies and cultural matches. Hofstadter's work is really interesting in regards to cultures and what people value, what they don't. So in Thailand, I had a really hard time. And so when I was offered the position in Japan, I made sure I took a short contract. That way, if things didn't go as planned, it wouldn't be too much of a hardship to endure it for 3 months. But I actually ended up loving Japan. I love it. Whereas in Thailand, I lost about 15, 20 pounds from stress and different things. In Japan, I gained that weight back and more.
The food is amazing. Yes.
It is. And here I was thinking that, Asian food, I'll get nice and skinny and that. No, not in Japan. And I was staying with the family, and that family had the mother was an amazing cook, amazing chef. So that was wonderful. So when my 3 months was up, I went back to Canada with the point of going back to Japan as fast as I could, because I loved it so much. And there was a specific program called the JET program, which employed teachers to teach English in Japan. And I wanted to go on that program because it was well organized, well funded, etc., and very safe. And I could have more choices as to where I wanted to be. In Japan, I was in a little village called Tarui. And I think I was the only foreigner in the village, the only, Black female villager, newcomer in the village, but it was wonderful. It was the kind of village where the women still wore kimonos and still wore those wooden shoes. So it was a phenomenal experience. It's very traditional. So anyway, so I came back to apply for the program, but I had missed the deadline, unfortunately. And so I thought, well, I'll hang about at my parents' place, live off of them for a year, and then apply again. And it was so funny because I met another woman who had graduated in education around the same time I did in Canada. And she's a Jamaican Canadian woman. And so we were helping each other out, find jobs locally and things like that. And she found a job in Saudi Arabia. And she was excited about it and was going, and she told me about it. And I said, good for you. And she goes, no, Dale, they want you to come too. There's 2 positions. Would you come? And I said, absolutely not, because I'm too much of a feminist to be walking behind men, just being totally subjugated and oppressed in an Arab culture. So no, thank you. And I was laughing about it with my mother. And I said, Mom, Sonia's invited me to go work in Saudi. And my mother, being the grounded, wise person she is, she said, well, why don't you? She said, it's only, for a year. They'll make accommodations for you to come back and interview for this other program in Japan. There is absolutely no tourism in Saudi Arabia at the time. So it'd be an opportunity to see a country that many people do not get to see. And she said, and if you think you're going to stay around here for a year and live off of me, you have another thing coming. So I got on the plane and went to Saudi Arabia. And the minute I landed, I loved it. I cannot explain it. Up to this day, I don't. It could, if you believe in past lives, it could be a past life experience or something. But I touched the ground and it felt like home. And I've never, ever experienced
many people talk about that, how you get somewhere and it feels like home. And the thing that I really want to point out is that we all have these just assumptions about particular locations. And I love how you felt one way. And then you go and you realize there's a completely different experience and how that is part of the experience. It's so easy for people to just assume about a particular location, but going there and being there and living there is completely different than vacationing there and not even, experiencing it. So thanks for sharing with that. If you don't mind, I would like to go back a little bit about your difficulties in Thailand. Can you share a little bit more about that, of what you found to be difficult?
Yes, I did. And again, it was this sort of similar visceral experience on landing, and felt all wrong.
Mm.
And it wasn't an academic thing. It was just the smells, just the
And what year did you
feeling.
go? What
It
year were
was,
you?
I was in Bangkok, and I first went there, I think 1994.
Okay. Okay.
You know, and at the time they didn't have high speed trains, you know, that sort of public transportation. It
Mm-hmm.
was you know, it was a big Asian city, and I had never before experienced that. I've since been
Mm-hmm.
back to Bangkok several times, and now with a different lens and with better infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot more palatable. It's a lot
Mm-hmm.
more livable. At that time, it was really harsh for me, and it was my first real overseas experience. I
Okay.
traveled a lot with my parents, like to
Mm-hmm.
France, to back to Barbados and different countries, but it was all very, you know, civil and compact and within a particular frame of time. But this was unlike anything I've ever experienced in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was working, three of us went from Canada, and we were working for a woman who had owned a school, and we stayed in her compound, and the gates were locked at night. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was a little bit frightening, thinking like, what happened? If something happened, if there's a fire, how fast could we get out? It
Mm-hmm.
just didn't feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
They felt it was safe. It was safer to lock us in than to leave the gates unlocked, you
Mm-hmm.
know, in
Mm-hmm.
case people came in and maybe kidnapped us or something. I don't know what the thinking was. And we lived in Don Muang, which is near the airport. So, and at the time, as I said, there was no light rail transit. So it took us hours by car to get into town and explore, you know, the tourist haunts, if you will, of Bangkok.
Mm-hmm.
It was very dirty. And then walking to school, the school was in the area where we lived. You had to dodge snakes, you know, and a lot of different stairs and insects and things like this. It was very uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know who's going to see this video, so you might want to edit out this next part. But
Okay.
remember, like we were basically bored. All we did was go to work, come back, and the work week in Bangkok or in Thailand is a lot longer than the U.S. And I think I'm Canadian, but I see that in the U.S. the work ethic is really high, and they work a lot in the U.S. But they work 6.5 days in Thailand. You basically had half a day off, you
Ooh.
know.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a bit relentless. And going into town was a big ordeal, big effort. So we explored the local neighborhood. And so we found a cafe, and we walked into the cafe, and we were treated like royalty. The women were just so elegantly dressed and beautiful and everything. And they gave us free snacks with our drinks and everything. And so we were feeling comfortable. So we'd go there 2 or 3 times a week. And then one time we decided we had a curfew at the residence where we stayed, but we thought we'd break it because we needed to relax some more time. So we stayed at this cafe past, say, 8 o'clock, and we saw the men start coming in. Sorry about the noise in the background. The men started coming, and the women would take them up one by one upstairs. And then we realized we were hanging out in the brothel. We were
Oh.
So,
Wow.
yeah, so no wonder they were treating us really well. And before 8, everything was fine. And then it switched. So I thought it was kind of funny. But it was a bit rough. And I thought, because it was my first experience of teaching, I thought maybe it was a teaching that didn't work for me,
Mm-hmm.
and I would try something else. So I met a group of journalists. So I went to work for the Bangkok Nation, a newspaper. And at that time, if you spoke English and were fairly articulate, you could get a job at the newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to the newspaper, but it was like as they say, jumping from the frying pan into the fire, or vice versa.
Okay.
And it was worse because it was interesting, and I could write stories about this, because I was surrounded by a lot of journalists who had seen some really harsh things. They were in the killing fields of Cambodia, et cetera, et cetera. And as a result, their coping mechanism was to drink copious amounts of alcohol. And that was not my style. It wasn't my community. Not that I'm a teetotal or anything, but I found it a bit rough. So I realized, no, this experience wasn't for me. So I went back to Canada and I said, I'm giving up teaching, I'm giving up travel. And so I was flying back to Canada, to Alberta, and I stopped in BC, and I called up my friend who lived in British Columbia, in Vancouver at the time, Diane, and she worked internationally too. And I was crying to her on the phone, oh, I'm going home, hopeless case. It didn't work out overseas, never to do it again. And she did a really amazing thing. She said, don't go to Alberta. I'll stay at the airport. I'll come get you. And she did. And then I called my mother. And because I have a hobby, which is film, I worked in the film industry for a little while. And my mom says, you're offered a contract to work on a film in BC. So it just worked out perfectly. So I stayed in BC, was able to decompress from that experience in Thailand, which was intense. And then I felt ready to go on another assignment overseas. And I'm glad I did. And that was the one in Japan, which was a beautiful and wonderful experience. And then from there, coming back, there are big organizations that hire teachers, like Search Associates. What are some other ones? International School Services, et cetera, et cetera. So I joined one of them, and then was offered positions. And then that's when I met up with Sonia, when I thought about going back to Japan, and took the position in Saudi, worked in Saudi for several years, but then I wanted to do my master's, and it was very hard to do that in Saudi Arabia based on the scheduling, based on the fact that, there wasn't a lot of distance opportunities. It was hard to get in and out of Saudi Arabia. It's quite a process, and your employer keeps your passport, and you have to apply to leave, when you want to leave. So all sorts of different protocols and procedures slowed things down. So I wanted to finish my degree, and they had a distance program in Kuwait. So I wanted to get a job in Kuwait so I could complete my degree. I wanted to stay in the Middle East because it was, financially beneficial to do so. In Saudi Arabia, not only did I pay off my undergraduate school loans, I paid for my master's outright and had enough to have a deposit on a house. Basically, you're paid well, or were at the time.
I've been told that, yeah.
Yeah, you don't, no taxes, accommodations provided, transportation to and from your home country once a year is provided. And so you had a lot of disposable income, so I would recommend it for young people starting out who want to clear debts and so on. Yes, you do have to live with some restrictions there, but if you're willing to comply with the laws of the culture, then it's fine, And then from there, I just moved on to different schools, obtained more and more responsibilities. I became an assistant principal in 2008. And then I was very fortunate. I was selected to be a principal of a brand new startup school, ACS Doha in 2011. And I was there for 6 years.
And this is in India?
No, this was in Qatar, in the Middle East.
Okay.
I've only been in Bangladesh for 1 year. Okay. Prior to Bangladesh, I was in Istanbul for 2 years.
All over, yes.
I know, yeah. And then prior to that, I was in Doha for 6 years. And yeah,
So how did you find out about all these different opportunities? Is it that people started to search you out, or were you looking at different websites for different opportunities? But how did you find out about these various international opportunities?
right. It was a bit of both. Earlier on, it was me going to these large conferences, these search job fairs. Search Associates is one of the biggest recruitment agencies for teachers and leaders. And
Okay.
at Search Associates, and I had been with them for about 3 or 4 years, so they knew me and they could recommend things, positions to me. Or you go to a fair and there's listings of jobs on boards. And there was a new school opening up in Doha. And I like innovation. I like being at the forefront of anything that's new and innovative. And I like the idea of this school in Doha and the chance to have an impact. And so I just put my name down, was expecting to apply for a teaching position, just general position. And I was having this interview and I realized that the interviewer, Diane, I'll never forget her, just a wonderful, wonderful woman. She was asking me questions about leadership. And I said, well, what position are you interviewing me for? And she said, the principal. And I said, okay. And we continued. And then they offered me the position. And I think, they did take a chance on a newcomer. And it's quite unique because you don't see many Black women as administrators in international school circles. And this is most unfortunate. And if you Google it, there was a woman who wrote a letter to Search Associates, a Sudanese woman, who articulated precisely what so many of us Black people experience in international circuits. I'm a little more fortunate in that I feel I have been given opportunities. People were willing to take chances on me. Yes, I did have the qualifications and experience, but it was really rather challenging. But in hindsight, I wouldn't do anything different. I mean, the journey's worth millions, you know? And then as you attend conferences, as people get to know you, as they get to know your work, whether through others, through teachers, other administrators, through the publications I write, then, people start approaching me. So for the last 2 positions I had as both a head of school in Istanbul at Seven American College and my current position at Aga Khan in Dhaka, I was approached by recruiters, by headhunters. Okay. But it does take time to get to that point.
Okay. And so you gave some great resources for those who are listening or watching, and you are a teacher and you've been hearing so much about people teaching internationally. I guess one of my big questions is you went to so many different countries and I imagine you didn't speak the language at most of them, correct?
Correct. Except for Germany. For some strange reason, when I was in high school, I took German. I took German and French. And French, because Canada is a bilingual country, and I love the language, and I love France. I'm a real Francophile. And then for Germany, it was offered and it seemed interesting. And so I took it. And it's interesting how that latent knowledge comes back like 20 years later. And so I was able to function in German quite well, basic German, nothing elaborate. I couldn't give speeches, but yes. And then Thailand, I wasn't there long enough. Japan, you learn the few phrases to get by and to get around. And especially if you're the only English person in town. You do make an effort to pick up some phrases. In my career, I've been in the Middle East the longest, and I did take Arabic lessons, and I could function at a basic level in Arabic. But with many of these countries, you don't need to because there's such a desire of people to learn English and practice their English, and there's a sizable enough population who are bilingual or monolingual English speakers that you can get by. Turkey was a big challenge because Turkish language is fascinating, but very, very complex. I think there's like 2 or 3 base languages of other countries in that language. And then they have so many grammatical rules. It's baffling. In Bangladesh, I haven't had time. It's been an intense assignment to learn Bangla, but so many people speak English, and we are an English medium school. So I do not need to.
So
Yeah.
how you've had this is exciting. You have done so much and been to so many countries. Like, how do you think moving to these various countries have changed your perspective on life?
Well, most obvious thing is there isn't one perspective. There isn't one right way, and it's forced me to really examine my values, my needs, and what suits me. And I think, had I had that perspective earlier on, I would have just gone to the countries whose values mirror mine, you know, and I wouldn't have grown. I wouldn't have learned to be so patient. And, as a teacher, as a person, you say, oh, respect all views, but do you really? But, but it really forced me to challenge, just to step up to what I say I believe. And I think it's made me a lot more compassionate with individuals. It's given me a real appreciation of my home country right now, which is Canada. In terms of, we take a lot for granted here. We take a lot for education, healthcare, safety, good governance. And I've been in countries where there is not that whatsoever. And sometimes it feels absolutely chaotic. Like, how does this world function? And obviously, a lot of patience. In Dhaka, how many 40 million plus people in the city in a small sort of landmass, and traveling, 5 kilometers might take you up to 2 hours. You do learn that level of patience. And, at the time, I think it was the right time for me to be experienced in terms of as a growth process, some sort of spiritual process. But you do reach a point in time where you're fortunate enough to be in a position where you can make some decisions about place, about values, and better alignment. And that's where I'm at now. I'm not going to go to a country for the sake of exploring that country and to have a job in that country. I can be more selective about where I need to be, where I want to be, based on my needs, based on values, based on the school, and the values of the school I choose to work in. But for me now, it's pretty much about alignment.
Perfect. And what advice would you give for those individuals who are interested in moving abroad?
I think you find a way to just do it, according to Nike. But the thing is, even if you visit, don't wait for the big job to come before you go, because sometimes they're not online. And I think you can achieve a lot of opportunities through people. And I think it's really good to visit, explore, and see if it's a place where you would like to be for a while. And also, don't feel like if you go and you don't like it, that you're stuck. Right. You can make another decision to move on. And I would always say, although you might not want to be in an expatriate bubble, utilize the resources of expatriate groups to get to know people, so they could introduce you to others. So for me, it's been a balance of, accessing the expatriate community and delving into the native community. And you need both. I think the saddest thing in the world is to move abroad and immerse yourself in a little Canada or a little America, because you might as well have stayed at home, Right. So branch out and do it. I was going to say do it while you're young, but even do it while you're old,
Yes.
Because it is so enriching, and you never know who you're going to meet. And I've met some wonderful people, and also sometimes you have the opportunity to move in circles and have opportunities that you would never get at home. I'm fortunate to be able to be part of the diplomatic community in Bangladesh, and it's open, it's welcoming, and that wouldn't happen for me here in Canada, in Ottawa. If I go into Ottawa, you'd be, barred from a lot of those embassy events. But in other countries, the doors are wide open.
That's beautiful. Well, I have one last question that kind of peeked in. But far as, and you're traveling to all these places by yourself?
I am. Yeah, I am.
So how do you ever worry about safety as a woman and as a woman of color, if any of the issues are going to be safe or unsafe like that, especially with India? I've heard that some things were going on there.
Yeah, true. Now I'm on the border with India, but I'm actually in Bangladesh. But it's Bangladesh, well, Dhaka and Calcutta have similar cultures. They both speak Bangla, say. But in Bangladesh proper, one has to be very careful. And you use common sense. Like, I wouldn't run around midnight in Dhaka, but I wouldn't run around midnight in New York City or Toronto either. So one has to be careful. And I'm very fortunate because my employers, they take really good care of me. And they provide me with a car and a driver 24/7. They provided me with an apartment in a very beautiful area of town. And there's guards at the gate. There was a tragedy 2016 in Dhaka where a lot of expatriates were shot. And since then, the security has been stepped up. So any building of repute will have guard security there, which I am thankful for. And you're just very prudent. And then there are some countries like Doha, where you left your car unlocked, you left your apartment unlocked, and nothing was ever taken, ever, So, and it depends on the country, and know the country you're in, and know the laws, know the regulations, and don't think that your laws and standards from your own country automatically apply. Absolutely. Like Dubai is a case in point. So one may feel like holding hands with a partner of the opposite sex in their own home country, think nothing of it, and do the same in Dubai. No, you will be arrested. You will be stopped. So you need to know what those rules and regulations are.
Absolutely. This was really exciting. I mean, I think you're awesome, and just want to thank you so much for talking to me and the audience today. We appreciate it. Guys, please say thank you to Dale. We have her contact information in there because this was awesome. So until next time, guys, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.